Hello, Janet here from Paper and Spark, and in this video I'm going to quickly walk you through the differences between my original inventory cost and pricing spreadsheet, which I'm now calling the inventory cost and pricing spreadsheet for one-of-a-kind makers, and my new inventory spreadsheet, which I am going to call the inventory cost and pricing spreadsheet for batch makers and multiple quantity handmade sellers. You may already have the original version, or you might be a new potential customer trying to decide which spreadsheet is going to be the better fit for you. So that is what I am going to address, hopefully in 5 minutes or less. So I just want to point out first, especially if you're new to my spreadsheets, both of these files are going to give you the numbers that you need to cost and price your inventory and to get what you need for inventory related to tax purposes. The main difference is just going to be how you get there and how easily you get there. So just to reiterate that, both spreadsheets will help you get your cost of goods made and your cost of goods sold information. They'll both help you figure out the amount you spent on inventory each year. They'll both help you figure out your cost of ending inventory, both in regards to your raw materials and supplies and your finished goods and ending inventory. And they're both going to help you set a profitable price point for your item. They're just going to do it a little bit differently, and one version is geared more towards sellers who are handcrafting individual, custom, unique, one-of-a-kind items, and the other version is going to work better and easier for sellers who make the same handmade items over and over and are selling multiple quantities of the same thing, or if you're making your items in batches. So with that being said, the big overview, let's cover kind of the differences between the two. So first, I'm going to look at the original inventory cost and pricing spreadsheet, which I'm now calling the inventory cost and pricing spreadsheet for one-of-a-kind makers. On both spreadsheets, you enter your raw materials and supplies pretty much the same way. So I'm not even going to really discuss how the materials tabs works. It's a moot point because it's the same between both spreadsheets. The main differences come into play when we create a newly finished good. So on the original inventory cost and pricing spreadsheet, when you create a new finished good, you enter it on your cost of goods made tab, you figure out a cost for that item, and then the cost and the item description itself will flow to your pricing tab. On the pricing tab, you're going to set a profitable price point for that item, and then the description, the cost, and the price will travel to your inventory tab. Once that finished good sells, you will mark it sold with a date on this inventory tab, and then after that point, the sales price of the item and the cost of the item will get dumped in the applicable sales or cost of goods sold bucket in whatever month it's sold in. So that is pretty much how the original spreadsheet flows, and this means a couple different things when we contrast it to the new version. First, all these tabs are linked together. You cannot just go through and enter a new item willy-nilly on the inventory tab. You have to start out by figuring out its cost on your cost of goods made tab. Once you enter it here, then it flows to your pricing tab, which is then linked to your inventory tab. Also, notice that the inventory tab cannot handle multiple quantities. Every item you sell has to be entered on the cost of goods made tab, and even if it's the same exact item again, you would enter it again as many times as you made it. That's because the item has to be marked as sold, and if you have like 5 items on this row and you're not selling them in batches of 5, you can't mark a date sold for one individual item in that batch. So this spreadsheet requires you to enter your finished goods one by one. That works really well if you're making unique items, if you are custom creating things, if you're not making your handmade goods in large quantities basically, or if everything you make is unique and different. It even works if you don't mind entering the same thing a few times because you're selling it maybe not in huge quantities, and the benefit of this spreadsheet is that you get to see the sales and your cost of goods sold for each month if you want to keep track of that on a monthly basis. I'll also note that this spreadsheet uses a lot of dated formulas. So because it uses dated formulas, we can use this same spreadsheet from year to year. Notice that I have multiple tabs of cost of goods sold and sales on this one spreadsheet. So you can just keep using this same file into eternity to keep track of the inventory numbers you need for taxes, because it's looking at your date of purchase, it's looking at your date sold, and it knows where to lump those things in. And we can just add a new 2019 sales tab in here to keep it going into the future. So with this file, you're kind of one and done. We might need to add a new sales tab in for you, but everything stays in one place. So with those thoughts in mind, let's contrast that to the inventory cost and pricing spreadsheet for batch makers and multiple quantity handmade sellers. Again, we've got our materials tabs. Everything here is pretty much the same. The big difference here is how we enter our finished goods. First, I've had a lot of feedback from people using the original version that wanted to just dump stuff directly on the inventory tab. They did not want to have to start out on the cost of goods made tab or the pricing tab. They just wanted to enter things directly into here. So the tabs all still exist. There's still a cost of goods made tab and there's still a pricing formula tab, but they're no longer mandatory. They're more optional now. You can enter a finished good here and just like the other version, figure out a cost of that item, but it's not going to automatically flow for you to the pricing tab. These cells are no longer linked to the cost of goods made tab. And anything you enter on the pricing formula tab is not going to automatically travel to an inventory tab. So on one hand, this gives you a little more freedom to not use certain aspects of the spreadsheet that may not always be useful for you. Maybe sometimes you need pricing help and other times you don't. But it also, if you would be depending on these tabs and using them for almost everything you make, it takes out a little of the automation. So now you're having to either link yourself or manually type in the product description, the cost of goods made, and the retail price on this version of the spreadsheet. So only you can know if that's like a pro or a con for you. Taking another look at the cost of goods made tab, I now have a batch column. So if you make something like, say, soap, for instance, and you're making an entire log of soap or whatever, you can figure out the cost of that entire log and then divide it by however many pieces of soap are in that batch or in that log to get you the cost of the individual bar of soap. This units and batch is a new feature on this version of the spreadsheet. So if you were creating things in bulk or in batches, it's going to be a lot more helpful to you to figure out the cost of goods and figure out the cost per individual item in that batch. The most helpful feature is going to be on the green inventory tabs. You are now entering your finished inventory here. You're still tracking the cost and the price, but now you can enter a quantity. That's the hugest benefit. If you're making the same item over and over and it's identical, you could enter a quantity and keep track of your units sold each year. Now, the main caveat to having it set up this way is that you'll notice there's no more monthly tracking of your total sales and your total cost of goods sold. I'm tracking what you need for year end, for taxes, which is going to be really helpful for doing your Schedule C or filling out your inventory stuff for taxes, but you no longer get to see what's going on month to month. That's because the spreadsheet doesn't know when during the year you're selling these units. It just knows what's going on all throughout the year. If you're using one of my seller spreadsheets that calculates your total sales for you each month, then this might not be much of a deal breaker, but that is something to keep in mind. Another big benefit of this version of the spreadsheet is that I've added in personal use columns that help you keep track of the cost of inventory that you have taken out for a non-business purpose. So this is a number that you need for taxes too, and now you're finally able to keep handy track of it here. Finally, this version of the spreadsheet does not use any dated formulas, and there's pros and cons related to that. What that means is that you will actually use a new spreadsheet file from year to year, and you will follow a few steps at year end to correctly close out the spreadsheet, get the numbers you need for taxes at year end, and then roll over existing ending inventory to the new year. So there's going to be a specific set of steps that you will need to make sure you follow at year end and at the beginning of the year to correctly roll over your spreadsheet and start fresh for the next year. So that's a little bit of the pros and cons of each spreadsheet. The original version, the one for one-of-a-kind handmade sellers, is going to be more appropriate for people who sell unique goods, custom, one-of-a-kind sort of handmade items. It has a little more automation because things travel from tab to tab, but the big caveat is that it is one row per finished good. There's no quantities here. And another bonus is that you can keep track of your sales and cost of goods sold from month to month. The inventory cost and pricing spreadsheet for batch makers and multiple quantity handmade sellers is going to be more appropriate for those who sell bulk quantities, multiple quantities of the same handmade goods throughout the year and want to save themselves the trouble of having to enter those items over and over again on the inventory tab. So this spreadsheet is going to work better for those who sell like bath and body products. If you're a high volume seamstress selling the same items over and over, if you create jewelry but you're selling the same, 5 different pairs of earrings over and over, maybe if you're doing like vinyl or sublimation work and you are selling the same set of goods over and over, this spreadsheet will likely be more appropriate for you. Either way, don't stress out too much. They're both going to make your life easier. They're both going to help you get the numbers you need for taxes and help you deal with that inventory. It's just a question of how much work you're doing or how little work you're doing to get to that number. If you have any more questions about which spreadsheet is best for your specific situation, you can always email me at hello@paperandspark.com. Finally, both of these spreadsheets are for sale at paperandspark.com. Thanks.